Before we go to Daniel, I just have a couple of things to say. First of all, Ari, thank you so much for inviting me to be the escort of this group. I know that the CSP people are very well behaved, so I know that makes it really fun for all of us. And I see Mimi Goldstein nodding, so thank you. I know you're a good group. In order to get ready for our trip, because this isn't just education, we're actually going somewhere. We have to make sure that we're prepared, okay? So number one is, today, you don't need this, your passport, but make sure you know where it is, because within a year, we're gonna start traveling again. That's our hope, and I know that CSP has really great plans. At least that's what I heard from Ari. Also, on any trip, you gotta make sure that you're wearing the right hat. So in New York, it's snowing. So this is, but maybe, this is a part of our history too, comrades. But in this case, really the right hat is going to be CSP all the way. So if you don't have one of these hats, I highly recommend it. Ari gives me the extras, so but they look regular to me. I think even Daniel has one, so it's all good. But I just want to say that this is a great presentation. I've had the opportunity to hear it before. Daniel is a wonderful guide, and I don't want to put too much pressure on Daniel, but he doesn't just do this for Vilnius, what's also called Vilna, the Jerusalem of Lithuania, but also other cities too, as Ari mentioned. So with no further ado, let's go back to the past in a way that's really quite dynamic, that will help us understand who we are and help us to also imagine the future. So with no further ado, my friend, my teacher and our guide, Daniel Gurevich. Actually, one last thing I'm putting in the chat, because we actually need to greet Daniel appropriately, okay? In Lithuanian, on the West Coast, many of you are on the West Coast, right? You would say in Lithuanian, good morning is labas rytas, which means good morning, labas rytas. So whether you unmute yourself, we're gonna wish Daniel a good morning, which is a way of greeting him. And at the end, I don't want to spoil it, but this is gonna be the last thing I say. When Daniel is done, we're going to say ačiū, which is Lithuanian for thank you. You can't make these things up. So, my fellow Litvoks, I'm happy to present Daniel Gurevich. I will mute myself now, which will make people very happy.
So, hello everybody. Thank you, Aria. Thank you, Charles, for such a interesting and honored presentation of my shy persona. So I'm speaking with you from Vilnius. It's dark outside. It's not very cold already. The winter is coming to its end. The snow started melting today, so we already have some smell of coming spring. So things get better, not cold anymore. My presentation is actually a result of many years of working with people, traveling in Lithuania, outside Lithuania, and escorting quite a lot of groups, and also was a big honor to guide the CSP group 2 years ago. So I am honored to be here, and my presentation will consist of two parts. First, it will be historical part, accompanied by the slides presentation, and then the second part will be video presentation, which will have like a background video of sites in Vilnius. Sometimes I will be in the video, sometimes my colleagues, but it will be silent. You will see me talking on the video, but it will be silent. I'll do all the guiding because I want to interact with the group and not to let you see the video episode, which you can maybe even find on YouTube. So let me see. And by the way, questions, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat, and Charles will help me with questions, or you can unmute yourself and ask something if it is relevant at the same moment. So I don't mind being interrupted and answering some questions. So my first presentation starts here. So you can see full screen, everything is fine. So this is, by the way, the picture from the mentioned group on Jewish Street. So Lithuania, where is Lithuania? Here on the left, you can see a map of Europe with the tiny country of Lithuania. And here on the right, you can see a bigger map, Lithuania with its neighbors, Latvia on the north, Belarus behind me somewhere here, Belarus, Russian enclave, Kaliningrad, Poland on the southern border, and Lithuania, the size of Lithuania is 65,000 square kilometers, which is less than the state of New York. This is very briefly the geographical location of Lithuania. Here on the right, you can see some pictures, some churches, some nature views. Lithuania is very flat country, no mountains, on the southeastern border of the Baltic Sea. So it was first time mentioned about 1,000 years ago by an Arab traveler who passed by these territories and wrote a diary mentioning this country as Lithuania. And he also mentioned the settlement of Vilnius and the settlement of Kaunas, the second large city of Lithuania. So after this traveler visited Lithuania, Lithuania remained a pagan country, a pagan nation. It's really, sometimes it's a bit complicated how you define a country or in Europe at about 1,000 years ago. So Lithuania was a territory, it was an organized country. So last pagans in Europe. Most of European nations were baptized, much earlier. Some later countries which were baptized, for example, Poland, in the middle of 10th century, Russia about the same time, a little bit later. And there were attempts to baptize Lithuania from inside and by force from the outside. A lot of them failed up until 1387, when Lithuania started its love story with Poland, when the Duke of Lithuania married the Queen of Poland, Jogaila married Jadwiga, and in 1387, Lithuania was baptized. About the same period, a little bit earlier than the baptism of Lithuania, the first Jews migrated into Lithuania. And actually, this became possible because one of the Grand Dukes of Lithuania, Grand Duke Gediminas, by the way, the picture in the middle, the middle picture of the three is made from Gediminas Hill in the very center of Vilnius city. So Gediminas invited foreigners to come and settle in Lithuania. And as he sent these invitations to the German-speaking Germanic countries, there was people who came answering his invitations were Germans and Jews and some other smaller, let's say, ethnic groups or national minorities. So he invited foreigners, not Jews specifically, and he granted them all the rights. he promised them religious tolerance and fulfilled it, freedom of settlement, freedom of the occupation, and low taxes in order to attract them. He promised them low taxes for a certain period of time. And this started a period of about 200 years of good relations between the Grand Duke and the Jews, and relatively good relations between the locals and the Jews. So actually, you know, when we speak about historical processes, quite often we speak about paradoxes and controversies. So, and Lithuania is not an exception. The same happened here. When the relations with the Grand Duke, Jews and the Grand Duke, were, let's say, quite positive, relations with the burghers, citizens, and clergy many times were quite problematic. So the relations deteriorated, and there was an expulsion of Jews from Lithuania by the end of the 1400s. So, you know, small detour from our virtual tour in Vilnius, you know, that in Europe it was quite common to expel the Jews. They always had the reasons, religious reasons, or social or commercial reasons to expel the Jews, and it's actually easier to name few countries from which Jews were never expelled than to list all the countries, European countries from which Jews were expelled, starting from Great Britain in 1291, and then France, Italy, other countries, and of course the infamous expulsion from Spain, which happened in 1492. 3 years later, 1495, Jews were expelled from Lithuania. How many Jews were in Lithuania at that time? About 3,000 people, and they were expelled. So they were expelled from Lithuania, which was much bigger. You see the map, and you see Lithuania and Belarus. So today it is Belarus, but once it was Lithuania. So from that territory, Lithuania, Belarus, which is like 6 times bigger, 5 times bigger than nowadays Lithuania, 3,000 Jews went to Poland, and some of them went to Russian duchies, which are south from Belarus, which today are known as Ukraine. So this happened 500 years ago. The same Grand Duke of Lithuania, Alexander from Jagiellonian dynasty, he expelled the Jews and he allowed them to come back. And now we switch to the development of Polish-Lithuanian relations and the involvement of the Commonwealth of Two Nations in 1569, when Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine became one country. It was a union of 2 countries because Lithuania conquered, Lithuanian dukes, they conquered southern territories, Belarus and Ukraine, and Poles, they were interested in coalition with the Lithuanians. As it's only 1 hour tour, I will not go into the details explaining this process and the politics and the social aspects of that process now, but take it for granted. Now, what's unique, and this is the second line of the title of this slide, is that actually the beginning of the period of the Commonwealth for the Jews of Lithuania, for the quite a sufficient part of Ashkenazi Jews, this was the beginning of the Golden Age. They got cultural autonomy, self-government laws. They had possibility to run a community actually as a country. They had their own courts, they had their own schools, of course they had their own synagogues, which was like the major importance. And actually they had their own parliament, which had the sessions and gatherings and the grand assembly and so on and so forth. If they would have, actually they had their own territories. The territories didn't belong to them, but if they would have like officially these territories and maybe some police or army, it would be a country. So they didn't have this. So we speak about cultural autonomy, which lasted for about 150 years. So 150 years, 400 years ago, it's 6 generations. Today, we live much longer. So we say that one generation is like 35 years. Then 20, 25 years was already, you know, another generation. So there were generations of people who were born in the golden age, and they didn't know that one day the things were different, or one day the things would become quite different from the current situation. So this autonomy is basis for the famous nickname of Vilnius, the Jerusalem of Lithuania, because Vilnius evolved into a very strong religious center, and not only the religious, later on cultural center. And of course, we'll mention the Villenegon as well a little bit later in our chronological story. So this cultural autonomy didn't mean the Jews were absolutely safe. For example, if we take the whole territory of the Commonwealth of Two Nations, I shouldn't forget to mention I put it in quote marks, the Holocaust of the 1600s, the Khmelnytsky riots in Ukraine and parts of Poland, and this I mention in memory of I don't remember the exact number, but thousands and thousands of Jews who were slaughtered then in these territories. And Lithuania was lucky to be outside this tragedy and conflict and persecution and annihilation of thousands of people. But Lithuania adopted a lot of refugees who were running away from the riots of Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his comrades. So again, paradoxes, yeah? Cultural autonomy, rights, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, there were, you know, the entire communities were destroyed. Now, the Commonwealth of Two Nations was military, political, and financial coalition of two countries, but it became rusty from inside. And when the three bordering empires felt that Lithuania, Poland is getting weaker and weaker, they took an advantage and partitioned the territories. And on the next slide, you will see a map, the same map, actually, the same territory, but already in the 19th century. So Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, they were annexed to Russian Empire, while other territories were divided between Prussia and Galicia or Austro-Hungary. So if we speak about Vilnius as integral, Lithuania, Vilnius as a concentrated theme of our virtual tour, so it became Russia. So for 120 years, these territories, they became Russian speaking. And Russians, they tried to Russify the local population, and Jews were not an exception in this case. And by the way, when Russians came to rule Lithuania, or these territories, they were told that Jews had a kind of cultural autonomy. And actually, I suspect that Russians didn't know the word autonomy then. And they said, why they should be segregated, separated, whatever word you use, they should be integral part of the society. And they decided to extract the Jews from the ghettos. No, I put the word ghetto now, which is clear to you, but at that time it wasn't used in Lithuania. The people didn't know this word. So they said, let's extract them from their schools. They shouldn't go to Heder or Yeshiva. They should go to regular schools. They shouldn't speak their language. They should speak Russian, and so on and so forth. So for some Jews, it was a disaster because they had, it was a danger of changing of their regular way of life. And for some Jews, and here I mention on this slide the Enlightenment movement Jews, it was an opportunity because suddenly they were allowed into the university. People who lived in Vilnius, suddenly they were allowed into Vilnius University, which is a Catholic university. We can't imagine that in the 1700s, Jews would want to go to that university. It's A, and B, they wouldn't be accepted even if they wanted to go, unless they baptized. So now 19th century is very interesting period for the Jews, and also very sad period for the Jews, because the Jewish Ashkenazi tradition, Jewish Ashkenazi community, which developed into this part of Europe and became home to more than half of world's Jewry, at a certain point, this became a ghetto. It became a huge ghetto. All that territory, which was part of Russia, it is known as the Pale of Settlement. The territory, which is like north-south, it's about 2,000 kilometers, and east-west, it's about maybe 400, 500 kilometers. But Jews were not allowed to go to Moscow or to St. Petersburg. They were limited. They were undesired elements in bigger Russian centers. Of course, not for all the Jews. For those who were rich, they were welcomed and accepted. So the turning point was when Russian Tsar Alexander II was assassinated in late 1881. And in 1882, the pogroms started, and a lot of Jews lived in very poor conditions. The so-called the Jew of a shtetl, the Jew who lives in a rural area in a small town. By the way, what's the definition of a shtetl? Shtetl is a town in Yiddish, and shtetl, when we say shtetl, we mean a place with a big Jewish community. It doesn't matter what was the percentage, what was the importance, but with a quite big, organized, sufficient Jewish community. So 30 years, from 1882 up until the First World War, 2.7 million Jews left Russian Empire, which means, if we speak in modern geographical terms, left Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, and went to the New World. 2.7 million in total. It was 60% of Russian Jewry. It was 27% of world's Jewry, and the 2 million went to the United States. And here I put the map of South Africa, because a lot of Jews from Lithuania, when they were not allowed into the golden Medina, into the golden country, they chose South Africa, as it was easy to get permits, to get visas to go to South Africa. So if we look at this picture, if we look at this broader picture, so 1,000 years ago, Jews started coming to Europe, to the western part of Europe, and they migrated through Europe from west to east, and the eastern point was here, let's say in Lithuania and in other places. And and from here, actually, they didn't go east anymore. They went to other places. So 20th century, the First World War. I will not stop at this point for a long time. After the First World War, Europe changed, and I show you here the colorful map of Europe with new born countries, nation states, and here you can see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Eastern Prussia, Poland. The borders changed, and here I show you on the left, it's a map of Lithuania, and the geographical border of Lithuania of 1918. And the same Lithuania, the same territory of Lithuania is today. Now, after the War of Independence, Lithuania was independent up until 1940, and it was a very interesting period when Jews were honored in Lithuania again, because they supported the independence of Lithuania financially, and both were fighting in the Lithuanian army. And it was very, very interesting, very controversial period. And closer to 1930s, closer to Hitler's rise to power, local nationalists became stronger and stronger. And there was a lot of anti-Semitic propaganda in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So step by step, the situation of the Jews deteriorated here. And so actually, if we, again, I like to give a broader perspective of what happened to the Jews. They came to Europe, the numbers grew here, all the expulsions and all the changes and all the privileges and so on and so forth. And the turning point was in 1882, the previous slide. And in 60 years, from 1882 till 1942-44, in 60 years, the two wars destroyed what was built for 600 years, if we speak about the Jewish world of Litvaland, of Lithuania. Then was the first Soviet occupation as integral part of the Second World War. Then was the Second World War, the Holocaust for us. Then was second Soviet occupation from 44 till 91. And in 91, Lithuania finally became an independent state and joined the EU in 2004. So this is, of course, very briefly the history of Lithuania with some Jewish accent. So here I'm ready to get some questions if somebody wants to unmute and ask.
I think at the moment, actually, we had one question. There weren't a lot of questions, which is actually a very good sign, Daniel, that you're being clear. So I'll just say there, achu. And how many of you, Joanne, thank you for laughing. Don't do it too often, and you'll encourage me.
So
right? Is achu, which means thank you. So, but we got one question just about Lithuanian geography. And this comes from John Kazar, and said, my family originated in Volkimir. Where is that in relation to Vilna or Vilnius, where we're going today?
Vilkomir is today, it's called today Ukmergė, and it's a middle-sized Lithuanian town located less than 1 hour drive north from my current location.
So would you drive by, what do you call Ghetto, where my family's from, to go to
Yeah,
Vilnius?
it's very close to Ghetto. It's not very close, but in the same direction, yeah.
All right, John, when CSP goes back to Lithuania, you and I will carpool. You'll drop me off at Ghetto, and then we'll go back to Vilnius that night for dinner in Uzipis or one of those other great neighborhoods for the amazing seasonal feasts of Lithuania. I see a hand. Oh, actually, I see some new messages too. The hand I see here is from Gerald. Do you want to ask a question? And by the way, we got a whole other half of this program coming down the pike. So, but let's take a couple questions right now. Gerald, I don't see that I'm able to unmute you. So I apologize. Oh, no, now you are. Good, good, good.
Okay. I spend a great deal of time in Lithuania. I'm from Chicago. And for the edification of the audience, I would like Ponas Gurevich to perhaps talk about two things. anti-Semitism in Lithuania today, and also the pretty awful conflicts between different groups of Jews within Lithuania.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I know that as the end of Daniel's presentation, that is going to be something that we're going to be, touching upon. The Jew versus Jew conflict in Lithuania. That I think will come up as well, especially when we go to the scene behind Harris and Jan Schultz, which I think is the synagogue in Vilnius, right? So we'll hear a really interesting story about the conflict between Chabad and the Litvaks, the Mitznagim. Unfortunately, the conflict that exists there is I wouldn't say is ongoing, but has a new permutation today. I'm just going to look at one other. I'm going to look at the chat box.
I want to give an answer. I don't want to leave it without an answer.
Please.
So I will start from the second question. So the second question is about the conflicts inside the Jewish community, and actually there always were conflicts. And there are conflicts now, and at the moment they are like very slowed down and almost forgotten. I think that when people have a common enemy, like the pandemic situation and everything, they tended to put aside less important things, and this only testifies that all these conflicts, they are not very important. So actually, I really don't think that it's a very interesting theme. Sorry for answering in such a way to your question, but actually there are always politics inside community, and there are different opinions between the different parts of the community. In my view, the community is too small to be split into another 2, 3, or 4 communities. But this is what happened today, and everyone goes to a different Zoom meeting today, and goes to a different. There is only one synagogue, but there are, let's say, theoretically online synagogues. But it's like a love story. One day they are together, and one day they are separated. So, but actually, I'm glad to notice that today, there is no fighting in the community, and I hope that this will last longer, because we people from tourism, we need peace in the world, and we need good politics in our country, because in that case we won't have to answer difficult questions. Now the first question.
So you know what, but let's, if you want to touch upon the first question real quick, but then I know we need to get to the walking tour,
Yeah.
So people start lacing up your sneakers.
So the anti-Semitism today in Lithuania, so of course it does exist. As a Jew in Lithuania, I can tell you that I actually don't feel it on a personal level, but what sometimes happens, there could be an article on some usually like yellow papers kind websites, and so when economical situation goes down, they recollect that there are Jews, and they can blame them for all the misfortunes. So about a year ago, there were some strange cases when somebody poured some paint on a few Jewish memorials without any, inscription, but just pouring the paint. And on a personal level, on a level of relations between like me as a Jew and my neighbors as Lithuanians, today it's not popular to be anti-Semitic anymore. At least that's what I feel among people I communicate with. Of course, you know, there are different people and there are different cases. So speaking of anti-Semitism or being anti-Israel, anti-Israeli, by the way, during the presentation they didn't mention, but I hold an Israeli passport. About 15 years ago, Lithuania, as well as neighboring countries, according to some very serious social researches, were very anti-Israeli and pro-Arabic, while today they're much more pro-Israeli than they used to be about 15 years ago. And it is quite pleasant to realize that, and the relations between the governments, the Lithuanian government and the Israeli government, I will not go into details about the governments of neighboring countries, are very good. And on UN Assembly, Lithuania voted for Israel many times, including the famous story of UNESCO and the resolution about the Jerusalem and so on and so forth. So I don't know. My first reaction is quite positive. And now Charles already points me that I have to work. So I will be happy to discuss it maybe on another occasion.
So as a transition, we're going now on the walking tour. With no further, there are some amazing questions. I put Daniel's address in the chat. I'm hoping at the end we'll have a chance to answer more of them. But this is not going to be the last time CSP is going to go for a spazierin with our friend Daniel Gurevich. So take it away. Let's now transport ourselves into Vilnius.
So before I push the play button, I want to tell you that the idea of putting the content of our tours on video recording came exactly 1 year ago, when the pandemic came to Europe, started in Europe. And we as team of guides realized that there will be no tourism in 2020. And we made about 75 episodes in Vilnius, in Kaunas, in other parts of Lithuania, of course, specializing on Jewish history, local and Jewish history. So I use, in this presentation, I use these materials. So the first frame is the territory of the Jewish cemetery, the old Jewish cemetery of Vilnius. And we are in the very center of the city of Vilnius. And you can see stones on the ground, which are put next to each other. These are former headstones, which were destroyed in 1950s and 1960s, were used for construction and brought back just recently. And here I walk on the territory of the second Jewish cemetery. The first one was filled with graves about 200 years ago, and Jews got the territory for a second cemetery. The entrance was here, and here you see the memorial, which has like the one column of the gate. It's symbolic that only one of two sides of the gate are here, so the cemetery is destroyed. And again, the stones. So the stones are polished. Many stones are polished, and it's almost impossible to recognize that they once used to be headstones. And they look like, I'll put it back, they look like steps. So this was the use of the Jewish headstones in 1950s and 1960s. And nobody dared to touch this theme under the Soviet regime. And in 1990s, Jews demanded to replace the stones which were recognizable as former headstones. And this is the grave of the Villenegon. When the old cemetery was desecrated and destroyed, Jews got permission to rebury quite a lot of graves, including the grave of the Villenegon. And later on, this tabernacle was erected on this spot. So, and the inscription is in Hebrew, Ohel Agrami Vilna, in honor of Villenegon. Now, here we jumped from the cemeteries to the very central part of Vilnius, and this is the backside of the Lithuanian parliament. And here you can see a memorial in honor of the last revolution, the blocks with some barbed wire on the top, with some inscriptions in Lithuanian language. Most of the inscriptions say Laisvė Lietuvai, freedom to Lithuania, and Russian soldiers go away. And these are events of 1989 till 1991, when Lithuania made its way to the independence from Soviet Union. And it's important to mention that Lithuania was the first republic to be separated from Soviet Union in 1991. So today we celebrate two Independence Days. One is historical Day of Independence in 1918, and another one in 1991. On the same street, the central street of the city, in few minutes walk, I've reached the building of, it's a court today, and it's a former building of KGB. So here you can see some names on the ground floor of the building. These are names of people who fell victims to the Stalin repressions in 1940, and then after the war, 44 till 1953, the very dark period of Lithuanian history when over 100,000 people were exiled to Siberia. Continue walking on the same street from the parliament towards the Cathedral Square. We see a lot of beautiful Baroque and neoclassical buildings, some official institutions, a lot of restaurants, nice boutique shops, Academy of Arts with flags on the left, Academy of Science, and so on and so forth. This is how the central Vilnius looks today. This video was made about 1 year ago, April last year. So when there were still people on the streets, and step by step we come to the Cathedral Square, and this is the cradle of Lithuanian capital. So here I would like to introduce my colleague, William. He's also a tour guide, and he runs this episode about the cathedral. And here he shows the statue of Abraham with the sword, the story of Isaac and the sacrifice, demanded to sacrifice son Isaac. So from the cathedral, we'll move to the old city. So on one side of the Cathedral Square, there is a river on which Vilnius city was founded about 700 years ago. And the original name of the river is Vilna. So the name of the river is a source for the name of the city. By the way, this neoclassical church was redesigned and rebuilt about 200 years ago by a Lithuanian architect who studied in Rome and fell in love with classical architecture. From the Cathedral Square, just a few minutes walk, we are on another small square in the old city, which is surrounded by buildings. The green building and the building with the tower in front of you is Vilnius University, part of Vilnius University. And another building, which you will see in a second, is the presidential palace. Lithuania is a parliamentary republic, so we have a president who has power. We had a woman president for 2 terms, so they have a veto right, so they can comment on the legislation of the parliament and send back the laws to be changed. So from the parliament building, I took a Segway to drive through some narrow streets and to show you the empty streets of the beginning of pandemic period. And we turn into a narrow street which is called the Writer's Street. And on this street you can see some small pieces of art on the walls. So the whole street is decorated with small pieces of art, 228 pieces of art. Each of them represents a writer or a poet who had some connection with Vilnius, not necessarily living in Vilnius. And here I show you the picture of Moshe Kulbak, a Jewish poet who was not born in Vilnius, but lived in Vilnius for a long period of time. And he wrote a nice poem called Vilna, which is translated into many languages today. And he is the only Jew who is mentioned on these walls as a writer. And this is a picture of Adam Mickiewicz, the famous Polish poet who lived in Vilnius many years when he was young and studied here in Vilnius University and was involved here in the anti-Tsar activities. So from Literato Street, we turn, and now we are on the main street of the city, the street which is called the Castle Street, and it connects between the Cathedral Square, which is behind us, and the Town Hall Square, which is actually almost in front of us. Now here, here is some small shop or kiosk on the right. Here was one of the entrances into the Jewish neighborhood, into the historical Jewish neighborhood of Vilnius, and Russian Orthodox Church on the other side of the street. That's how the old city of Vilnius looks today. And excuse me. And here we are on one of the Jewish quarter streets, turning into the former Jewish street, which today has a name of the Vilna Gaon. So if I stop here, you can see on the sign of the street it says Gaona, in Lithuanian means Gaon. Now it's very center of the city. From here to the university, the spire of a church, if you see in the center of the frame, of the stopped frame, it's the university. From the university to the cathedral, another few minutes walk. So in Vilnius, everything is very close. And actually, when people ask to give them a tour of Vilnius city, it's almost impossible to separate the Jewish history or the Jewish sites and the general sites, because they're all together. On the left side of the frame, now you can see the plug on the wall with the map of two ghettos. And this place is the place where the gate into the small ghetto was erected in 1941. The small ghetto existed for 7 weeks only. Now, from the houses which you see on the both sides, they are old houses which were Gothic ones, and they were rebuilt into neoclassical style about 200 years ago, and they were enlarged a little bit. So these are old houses which were owned by the Jews for about 400 years or even longer. Here on the wall, you can see another memorial in honor of the Jews, of the Jewish history, of the Jewish heritage. And it mentions the praying room or a synagogue, as they wrote. And by the way, this plaque was erected by Austrian embassy, which was renting this house. So if there were really 160 synagogues in Vilnius. So here I have to explain that 35 were synagogues, 75 were shtibla or praying rooms in the houses, and 55 were study houses, Talmudei Torah. So altogether, before the Second World War, there were 160 places of Jewish worship in Vilnius, which was triple in number than number of churches at that time. Now, this a little bit wider part of the street, I put the blurry picture on top of it to show you the Jewish market. It was a street market. It was a small territory where Jews were concentrated and lived here. And on that market, all the daily life happened. So we continue walking on the same line, entering a Jewish street. and we get closer and closer to the location of the great synagogue. Why location? Why not a great synagogue? Because the great synagogue, which was built in 1572 and enlarged many times, it was destroyed during the bombings of the liberation of Vilnius city in 1944, July 1944. And the ruins were cleaned after the war, and today there is another building. So in the synagogue, the great synagogue, became a center of Jewish life of Vilnius, and around the great synagogue, just here, there were 14 smaller synagogues. And here I put 3D graphics of how this location looked like before the Second World War. And in the very center of this blurry picture, you can see the great synagogue which was big enough to accommodate about 3,000 people. And there were 2 annexes as women's sections, and so on and so forth. So it was decorated in a Baroque architectural style. Just next to the...
Just one question, Daniel.
Sure.
Number one is just for the ghetto, as we were walking by, someone asked what were the years of the ghetto, and how many people were found, how many people were there until it was liquidated. Excuse me.
The ghetto in Vilnius, there were 2 ghettos. The large ghetto, we will walk there and we will stop in a few places. The large ghetto existed for 2 years. The small ghetto where we are now, the territory of it, where we're standing now, was liquidated 7 weeks after its involvement. And how many people in the small ghetto? There were 11,000 people, and all of them, they were sent to death by the end of October 1941. In the large ghetto, there were 29,000 people, which is altogether makes 40,000. But Vilnius had about 70,000 Jews at the eve of the Second World War, and the percentage of the annihilation in Lithuania and in Vilnius as well is the high. Unfortunately, I have to admit that I live in a country with the highest percentage of annihilation of the Jews during the Holocaust, 95%. More questions?
There was a question from Deborah Glazer about, she thought the Germans purposely blew up the synagogue, that it wasn't destroyed in the general bombing. Can you confirm that or explain that?
The Great Synagogue and the 13 smaller synagogues in the same location and the house of the Villenegon, they all were destroyed during the battles. So it's not, it was not like it was, for example, in Warsaw, when the Great Synagogue was on purpose blown up by the end of the uprising. So what was in Vilnius, Vilnius is quite far east. And here the battles of the liberation were quite early. If we look at the process of the Russian army moving from east to the west. So here Nazis were busy with killing the Jews, and they didn't come to the stage of destroying the heritage. Of course, it's a very brief answer. We can talk about that for hours.
No, I think this is, the walking tour is really the overview. And I think CSP is going to need to bring you back. One last question before we keep walking. It's very easy for me to spend Ari Katz's money. I actually quite enjoy it. If any of you want to unmute yourself, you can propose a lot of programs. Okay, not the best joke, but still, I keep trying. Anyway, how many Jews are there in Vilnius today?
In Lithuania, it's about 4,000, maybe a little bit more than 4,000. Majority lives in Vilnius.
Okay. One last thing before we
3,500.
One last thing before we keep walking is that Professor Richard Freund, I think, has presented to CSP before, and Richard Freund is has done this new type of geothermal, whatever it is, archaeology, and he's the one who has discovered much of the ruins, or actually what there is to find beneath the Great Synagogue in Vilna. Let me turn it back over to Daniel.
Sorry?
I said, let's keep walking.
Okay. So this, you can see some soil on the ground. It's not paved. So here was the house of the Villenegon. Actually, he didn't own the house. He lived in an apartment which was supplied by the community. By the way, the gray building is
an hour and a half ago.
Excuse me. So here is a statue of the Villenegon, and I put his picture on top of the statue. He was born in 1720. He lived in he was born in a small town not far from Minsk. It's not a town actually; it's a village, Seltzy, and he moved to Vilnius. At a certain point, there was a period of time when he lived in the town of Kedaine, where he studied at the yeshiva. He expelled himself for 3 years. He traveled from one Jewish community in Europe to another Jewish community, and he spent time there. He found a lot of new books, and he continued his studies. He got married, had 8 children, married twice. His first wife, Hannah from Keidan, passed away, and he married for the second time. And actually, this is only like tiny opening about the Vilna Gaon, and not to leave this information on a cloud. I would like to outline 3 major tributes of Rav Eliyahu ben Shlomo Zalman Kremer to Judaism. So first of all, he is known as a great commentator, a parshan, because he, after finishing studies of yeshiva at the very early age, and after studying both Talmuds, the Babylonian one and the Jerusalem Talmud, he made notes, and these notes appeared to be very meaningful and explaining a lot of unclear points in Talmud. And these notes later on evolved into Agachot Agra, or explanations of the Vilna Gaon, and they are up to date, are printed in Talmud books, in all Talmud books. So he was, Gaon in Hebrew means genius. He was brilliant enough, genius, to explain the commentaries of other Geonim, of other Gdolei Israel, of Rashi and the students of Rashi, and so on and so forth. So this is A. The B is he introduced a new way of Torah studies. He was a little bit paranoid, or maybe not a little bit, maybe really paranoid about losing time from studies. And he spent all his life in studies. And so his new way of studies was against Pilpul. He, as a real Litvak, was against many things. And one of them was Pilpul, and he said that the Pilpul, which in the afternoon has discussion about discussion, he said that it's a waste of time, and he introduced the Pshat as a new way of Torah studies without discussion, just studying the theme and moving forward. And the third thing, it is not a tribute to Judaism, but I put it as a famous thing about his statement was excommunicational ban against Hasidim which he signed when he was in his late 30s. So the house was also destroyed, but the memory is still alive, and people know about Villenegon, and not only Jews in Vilnius know about Villenegon. Of course, if we ask them what do they know about Villenegon, it's a second question. So from here we move forward, and we'll have some drone views of the central part of Vilnius city. So this is the territory we walked through, and you see the cathedral area in the far right, far left side now, and so now you can see the big church which just borders the Jewish neighborhood. Below us is the location of the great synagogue, and this wide street in front of us is called the German street. So there was a German neighborhood just on the other side of the German street from the Jewish neighborhood. And here I put you a picture of women in the kitchen. So this is about a restaurant of Fania Levando, and she became famous because somebody published a book with about 400 recipes of vegetarian cuisine based on a Jewish pre-Second World War restaurant in Vilnius. So Fania Levando, example of an average at that time, a simple.
Hold on 1 second.
Yep.
Daniel, I just want to if you can finish your sentence, if you can just go back 2 seconds. I just want to show everybody, so just so we can have her picture up. The book that Daniel mentioned is the Vilna Vegetarian Cookbook. And I think it's out of print now. Actually, when we did this, thank you, Ari Katz, when we presented this presentation to the Park Avenue Synagogue where I work, we put, the Amazon link, or if you want to look in a local bookstore to support local businesses, we put up this book, this amazing cookbook. And it really is an authentic Litvak, what's it called, recipe book. It's out of print, and someone offered me a lot of money for this book. I was tempted, but if you're able to get your hands on it, it's really wonderful. And it gives you a taste of the flavor of the these, of the food of this era that is now unfortunately a memory. But as Daniel's showing us, as we're continue on this walking tour, this place of memory is moving into the future.
So we continue on the main street, and now I will show you the former hotel. A current hotel. It belonged to, before the Second World War, it belonged to a Jewish family, to the Zalkind family. And they also built a first department store. So, and here William shows us the place of a butcher street, so which was one of the oldest streets in Vilnius, and the war and the destruction of the Second World War changed it a little bit. And here we enter the territory of the large ghetto. We already passed the location of the gate, and now we are walking through the streets full of memories of destruction and starvation and killings and also resistance. So Vilnius ghetto, Vilnius large ghetto existed for 2 years and 3 weeks, from September 6, 1941 till late September 1943. And so 2 years, the Jewish population at the beginning was 30,000 in the territory where 4,000 people lived before the war, and mostly non-Jews. The non-Jews had to leave their apartments. And Jews were step by step sent to death, and the population decreased. And here in the very center of the ghetto, there is a statue of a Jewish doctor Tzemach Shabbat, who was very famous in the Jewish community, and not only for being a doctor, but for being an active social leader of the community and the representative of the Jewish community to the authorities. And he also became a character for a book for children, which was written by his friend, Russian author Kornei Chukovsky. This book is very similar to Dr. Dolittle. Now, just next to the statue of Tzemach Shabbat, there is a Jewish Center of Culture and Information. It's a state institution. It's part of the Green Eye, the travel tourist informational center, and it has some information about the Jews of Vilnius and also an art gallery. Now here I explain this group of Vilnius citizens, by the way. I tell them the story of the resistance, of the Jewish resistance in the ghetto, and the confrontation between the head of the Judenrat, Jacob Gens, and Itzik Wittenberg. So here on the left is a picture of Wittenberg, who was a communist, and he actually initiated the underground organization, which later on was actually fighting the Nazis, and they also decided to run away to the forests when it was clear that the ghetto will be liquidated very soon. One of the leaders of our underground movement, Yehiel Sheinbaum, here on the picture on the left, he stayed in the ghetto. He didn't agree to run away to the forests, and he organized a barricade on September 1st, 1943, and was killed in a battle on the spot. Now, continuing walking on the same street in the ghetto, we see some inscriptions, Yiddish inscriptions above the entrance to the courtyard. So the inscription says that there was Sklad Kerosene, a small shop where people could buy oil and salt and cigarettes. And this building, covered by scaffoldings, it's an abandoned building today. It's a former Jewish library, which was a cultural center of Vilnius ghetto. Abba Kovner, the picture on the left, lived behind that building in a small building in the courtyard, and there he wrote his famous cruise, "Let us not go like sheep to the slaughter," and he participated in a meeting of youngsters, in the meeting of creation of underground movement in the ghetto, and he ran away with the other 130 partisans to the forest. He survived the war, moved to Israel, and became a famous poet in Israel, and passed away in late 1980s. And he participated on Eichmann trial. And if you are interested, you can see on YouTube his testimony on Eichmann's trial. And he read his letter and his appeal, "Let us not go like sheep to the slaughter," there. Now, here was a gate to the ghetto. The houses, which I put on top of the original frame, they were destroyed during the battles of the liberation. So, and of course, the gate is not here anymore. So from here, we move to the courtyard of Judenrat. So I've mentioned the underground, and I have to mention the Judenrat and Jacob Gens, who was the head of Vilnius ghetto for more than 1 year. And there is a lot of controversy about his personality. Some people said that he did what he could for the ghetto, and it was very positive and very good. And some people criticize his decisions and his deeds. Of course, it's very, very problematic to judge somebody in his position. But we can say that if we put in perspective and we compare different heads of Judenrat, so Jacob Gens was somewhere in the middle between Rumkovsky from Lodz on the very negative side to the, what was his name, Elkes in Kovna. He was very, very good for the Jews. Now, here are posters of ghetto theater. You can see the poster in the center, Mesibat Hanukkah Hagigit, the celebration of Hanukkah. And on top of the poster in the center, it says Brit Ivrit Ghetto, the organization of Hebrew studies in the ghetto, and they advertise the celebration of Hanukkah and other and Yom Kippur and other concert and so on and so forth. So the ghetto in Vilnius had all kinds of institutions, and including the library, 3 synagogues, 3 schools, 2 soup kitchens, and so on and so forth. So, and we continue rolling on the streets of the ghetto of Vilnius city. And here I stand in front of Vilnius Philharmonic, and I would like to mention Yasha Hefetz, who was born in Vilnius in 1901, who studied music here, and his first concert at the age of 8 was in this building. From after the First World War, the family moved to Russia, and from there they went to the United States, and there in the Golden Medina he became a famous Yasha, the most brilliant violinist of the 20th century. And the next topic is an interesting topic which has a lot of things to tell, is a charity tradition in Vilnius. And here on the wall of the building, which is just next to the Philharmonic, there is a plaque which has 2 words in Hebrew, Zichron Olam, in honor of, or memory of, sorry, and the rest is in Russian. Why Russian? Because this plaque was attached to this wall about 120 years ago, when the late Meir Fegelson passed away. He was a famous philanthropist, and he donated a lot of money for charity, and he supported 4 charity organizations in the courtyard of this building. One was Talmud Torah, the study house. There was a hospital, and a soup kitchen, and the 4th one I don't remember now. And another personality of charity in Vilnius is this lady, Dvorah Esther. She was famous. She became famous in a very interesting way. She was a poor woman, and she collected alms, but not for herself, but in order to give to other poor people. And step by step, she became very well known in Jewish Vilna, and the wealthy Jews knew that if they give her donations, she won't spend it for herself, but she will take it for other people. She was walking on the streets when she was young, and she had 3 pockets. One was for a poor bride, one was for hungry people, and another one was to help people, as she defined it, for tomorrow. Now, here you can see my father, the founder of our travel business. He talks about Tarbut School in front of the former building of a Tarbut School. Today, this building on the background of the frame is a Jewish community center. And here I show you the picture of Tarbut School from 1922. What is so special about Tarbut School is that it was the first Hebrew teaching school in Russian Empire, which was established in 1915. It's the period of the First World War. So here I stand on the it's a parking lot today, but on this parking lot was a building which belonged to IVO. As you know, IVO is an abbreviation for Yiddische Wissenschaftlicher Institute. This Yiddish institute was established in Vilnius in 1925, and Vilnius became a home not only for the big and vibrant Jewish community, but also for the first scientific Yiddish institute. It existed in Vilnius up until 1940, when it was closed by the Russian authorities. And thanks to the efforts of Max Weinreich, one of the founders of IVO, the documents in the library of IVO was taken to New York after the war in 1946-47, if I remember right. So, and this is a memorial plaque next to the dwelling house, which is erected on this location. So from here we jump to artist quarter in Vilnius, and the building on the left, on the background, like on the left side, with the 3 windows on both ground and the first floor, is a synagogue. Is a former synagogue of Užupis. Now Užupis, you can see on this metal plugs in the center, there is U and Z with a little V on the top. So in Lithuanian it's Už, which means for, I vote for. Now this artist colony or artist neighborhood, they have their own constitution. And here my father touches the plug, which he translated from Lithuanian to Hebrew, and we made this translation last year. There was a big ceremony of opening the constitution of artist neighborhood in Hebrew. And here we are, too quick, sorry, the building of the Choral Synagogue in Vilnius, the only synagogue of Vilnius today. The building is authentic. It was built in 1903 in a Moorish architectural style, and it is the only active synagogue and the only authentic synagogue of Vilnius. You see Eastern style decorations, a lot of ornaments, a beautiful Arona Kodesh, and the place for cantor to sing. So choral synagogue, the synagogue where were performances of cantors, and here were famous cantors as Gershon Sirota and brothers Avram and Moshe Kusevitsky, and many others. They performed here, and the synagogue Taharat Kodesh is known not only as a synagogue but also as a cultural center and a place of concerts. So there are daily services twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And on the second floor, there is a matzah baking machine, which reminds us of a Soviet period when Jews were not allowed to import matzot and not allowed to bake matzot, but they did it in a underground way. One of the Jewish bakers installed a matzah baking machine in the synagogue. It wasn't in such an open space on the second floor, but it was in one of the spaces of the synagogue, and today it's actually almost a museum. And here, when I touch my head, I recollect how we went to the synagogue with my father when I was a child, buying matzot for Pesach. So I think this is it, what I wanted to squeeze into 1 hour and 15 minutes. It took me 7 minutes more, but I think that you will excuse me.
Thank you. I think we have time for a few questions. Lots of questions, and I'm back, and I want to thank Rabbi Charlie for filling in. I had a business call, and I have to get another business call. But first of all, I want to say that there's nothing like actually going and walking this. As you can ask Harris and Jan and Marcia and Marshall Margolis, anybody that came with us, you really got to go and spend 2 or 3 days in Vilnius, walking around all the sites you saw and see them by walking to see how they relate to each other and spend time there. And then go to maybe find your family village or shtetl and go visit. But that being said, this is the next best thing, particularly now given COVID. Here are some questions for you. People ask, how come Vilnius looks so nice? If it was in a war zone, did it get rebuilt, or did it just stay so nice? The sub question is, how come the Choral Synagogue survived?
So Vilnius was badly damaged. About 30% of the old city was absolutely destroyed, but the rest remained. So actually it does look very nice, and a lot of renovations took place in the last 20 years. And really we have, although we are in northeast of Europe, but we have very Western European style capitals, both in Lithuania and Latvia and in Estonia. Now, what was the second question? Was the
synagogue?
The Choral Synagogue. It was not destroyed. because Nazis used it as a warehouse. And under the Soviet regime, there was another miracle that Soviet authorities allowed the synagogue to be operating, to be active synagogue. So, you know, in bigger centers as Moscow, St. Petersburg, to be a Jew was more complicated. But in a smaller town like Vilnius, you know, they didn't care so much. So that's why, you know, this synagogue was built in 1903, and it was not active only 3 years of the Nazi occupation.
People have asked, and I don't know if you answered your own family history, how you landed up in Vilnius, how long you've lived.
My own family history. So actually, the two sides of my family's part is from Ukraine, and they landed in Vilnius after the Second World War, when was quite a big inside Soviet Union migration of Jews, and many of them wanted to go west, which means to the Baltic states. So that's how my mother's family, originally from Ukraine, that's the point when they came here. My father's side is in Lithuania, was in Lithuania for 250 years or maybe 300 years, we don't know for sure, but for many generations. And my four grandparents, they were almost the only representatives of their families who survived the Holocaust. And they survived the Holocaust by not being in Lithuania, by running east from the Nazis. So, and after the war, we stayed. They stayed in Lithuania, and I was born by the end of the Soviet era.
And what's the quality of life, Jewish life, for you now in Lithuania? And do you think, particularly, what do you think about the Lithuanian government and how it thinks of its Jewish history and preservation of its Jewish history in towns like Vilnius?
The quality of Jewish life in Lithuania, I would say 7, 8 out of 10. And because we have a community center, we have national minority rights, we have a Jewish school, we have all kinds of organization, Maccabi and so on and so forth. So for those who want to be Jewish, there are all the possibilities, all the options. So I think it's very good, and it's quite different from my childhood. Not speaking of the huge difference from my father's childhood after the war, when it was almost impossible. I would say quite good. And in the recent decade, the Lithuanian society decided that Jewish history is part of Lithuanian history. Why I emphasize that? Under the Soviet regime and first 10 years, 15 years of the independence period, to speak about the Jews meant to speak about the Holocaust. So people were, you know, I remember my first tours, you know, people were asking questions only about the Holocaust. People who were first to come here, they came to see the bloodlands, yeah, not the Litvak land, but the bloodland. And step by step, this changed, both on the Jewish side and on the side of the Lithuanian historians, authorities, municipalities, and so on. And today there are more and more projects of preservation of the heritage. For example, the year 2020, which was a disaster for tourism, it was announced as the year of the Villenegon legacy and history and heritage. And there had to be hundreds of events, I mean, real-time events, not Zoom events. And of course, most of these events didn't happen. People didn't come. Some of them did happen on virtual platforms. but this gives you another pixel of how, what are the relations between the Lithuanians and the Jews today.
Deborah asked a question about obtaining Lithuanian citizenship that I don't want to go into now, but you can obtain it. My family's actually applying to get our citizenship back. There are certain rules and regulations, but if you have a grandparent or a great-grandparent that left during a certain period of history and they did not renounce their citizenship, for example, they were forced out of Lithuania or they escaped because of danger, you can claim it back. And I have 2 family members that have already got their membership back. The EU passport this way, by the way. Rabbi Charlie is applying for it. So it is happening. I don't know what the percentage is. Terry asked about Sugihara. I think that's a different presentation when we go to Kaunas, Kovno with you, which I think we'll do. And we'll get to Sugihara at a different program if you want to come back. People want to do another walking tour. I'm sure Daniel will do it with us. Another question that was asked was the name Vilnius. When we call it Vilna, was that an internal Jewish name or was it actually known as Vilna and then it changed to Vilnius? Can you tell us about that name?
Vilnius is in Lithuanian. In Polish, it's Vilno. In Russian, it's Vilna. And actually, I really don't know why different languages pronounce and name things in a different way. But this was always so, you know, they use different names.
I'm trying to look in our last minute or so because now it is 11:30. Can you talk about plaques? So you showed many plaques. I don't know if you talked about there's a language missing on the plaques. And can you tell us about the specific choice of what language is on the plaques? Because I don't think it's Hebrew, for example, right? I mean, when you see a plaque for a Jewish institution, what languages are on there and why?
All the plaques are in Yiddish and Lithuanian because people who initiated them, they didn't know Hebrew and maybe didn't think that English would be like a proper international language to put on. Newer ones have English and Lithuanian. There are some with Hebrew and English and Lithuanian and Russian. So it's a mixture of different versions. I think it was a specific decision of somebody who initiated the plug, and today there are a lot of them. But the newest ones, for example, as you remember, Aria, the one in Rokiškis, you know, it was in English and in Yiddish, which is very rare.
So Daniel, people apparently want to come back. So this is the last question. I think we're going to come back to Lithuania and we're going to take maybe Justin Cami with us. Maybe we'll throw Ariel Berger in. We're going to go on this amazing trip. And but we're going to go to the Ukraine. So we'll go to Lithuania and then maybe, I mean, I always want to go to Minsk and Pinsk because it's just funny sounding names. And it's very, how close is Minsk to you, like driving wise? If you got it and drove to Minsk today, well, how long will it take you?
If you change a president in Belarus,
right.
2 hours.
2-hour drive to Minsk.
With the same president, it's a little bit longer.
Okay, so we're not going to Minsk and Pinsk right now, but the idea is to go. But so people have asked, when do you think it'll be safe to come visit you in person so we can walk the streets with you and then go visit maybe the Ukraine or other parts of this really interesting part.
Yeah, the travel will be back.
What did you say? Sorry?
I said, I'm sure that next year travel will be back.
Okay. People, and so, you know, Jerry Silverman asked, Panari Forest, 9th, there's the forts, there's Trakai. Guys, there's a lot to see in Lithuania. And so we only gave, our trip was Lithuania for like 2.5 days. And my family arrived 2.5 days early to go see my own villages. I think you need 4 or 5 days in Lithuania to see the sites. Trakai is a city that's a moated city in which the Karaites have historically lived, and you can go visit that. That's about an hour from Vilnius. Panari Forest is a must visit, and that's about another hour from Vilnius, and that's where the Holocaust by bullets started. Kaunas, which is a very important town, is probably it's in the route. I mean, we drove probably around most of Vilnius in 2 days, but we didn't spend as much time as we needed to in certain places. So if you guys are interested, I think we'll bring Daniel back and let's go on a walking tour of Kaunas, which is Kovna. I don't know if you want to do a walking tour, to be honest with you, of Panari. You really have to go experience that and see what that's like and see how far it is outside of Vilnius. But I do urge you, you know, if you want to come with CSP and we're going to go to Vilnius, come with us and come to Lithuania, and we'll meet with Daniel in the streets of Vilnius. But if you want to organize your own trips, you should be, I'll email me, I'll put you in touch with Daniel, and you go to Vilnius, you fly in there, and then he will take you, as long as you know where your shtetls are, you can go visit your shtetls. It is not a big country. It is, Daniel, if you wanted to drive around all of Lithuania, how long would it take you to like kind of drive the whole country? A few days, 3 days to the.
I mean, if you drive not stopping, you can do it in 20 hours, I think.
Right. So that wouldn't be a good way to see Lithuania unless you like.
If you go to all the shtetls,
the landscape.
You are stuck for 3 days.
So what you really want to do, here's what I'm going to end with. Do your family history. Find, if you're Lithuanian, either I'm 100% Lithuanian. If you have Lithuanian in you, Lithuanian blood, find out what find out where your family comes from. I have family from Vilna, Rakishuk, which is Rokishkas, Panevez, Pakroy. By the way, Pakroy is this little town, but it has a wooden synagogue. It's been refurbished with the wooden art in it. So I got to go see that. Find out your town, and then do some history, and we can organize a tour. We did a Rukh family visit online. We had 130 Rukh family members about 2.5 weeks ago with Daniel, and we did a virtual tour of Rakishuk. And I took my family, or Daniel took the family through the town. We focused on the history of the town and where our Rukh family houses were, which are still there. It's a great way to reconnect with your own history, but also I reconnected with like hundreds of Rukhs from around the world, Canada, all over America, Israel, South Africa, and Australia. They came together, and now I have this. I had a big family to start with, and I got this massive family. Bialystok, Jerry, yes, that's another great place. We went to Bialystok on our tour. There's not much left there in Bialystok, and there's no Bialys in Bialystok, but it's worth going to see the history there. This country has, it's hundreds of years, as Daniel said, a heritage site. This is where we're from. The Villenegon, Vilnius, the shtetls, the Holocaust destroyed it, but it's not just about the Holocaust. And when you go there, you have to learn about the Holocaust by bullets, but you need to learn about the history, and all the way up to Young Vilna and Abukovner. It's a fascinating country. We really didn't do justice to it in an hour and a bit. Hope we did enough to give you a sense of what the city is like, and for you can meet our guide Daniel. Daniel, will you come back and do Kovno with us?
Sure, with great pleasure.
Okay, so that's it, people. I have to run to another meeting. So thank you for sticking with us for an hour and a half, and thank you we got there. I know I saw emails saying, when are we going to do our virtual tour? We got to the virtual tour, but you needed the history to make the virtual tour relevant to you. So take care, and if you want to know more about CSP, occsp.net. Email me if you want to go on another tour with Daniel, or if you want a private family tour, I'll put you in touch with Daniel. So take care. Nice to see many new people who I don't know. Judy Groner, I see you. Vivian Cohen, of course, and Ada. I have to run. Joan Hannick. I know you came with us on our tour when we went originally, but through the emails, now you come on this virtual tour. So you'll get there in person someday soon. Thank you, Daniel. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.